Hi, everyone. You're tuning in to listen to a conversation with Clare Richards from Mount Alexander Shire Council. Each month, LJU are exploring a different policy theme, and this conversation is part of this month's theme on housing. So, this session will be particularly interesting to those working in social and affordable housing or who work in rural and regional areas. My name's Emily Hobbs, and I work in housing policy for a consulting firm called SGS Economics and Planning. So we're with Claire, and Claire, I'm keen to understand a little bit more about what a housing solutions broker is exactly. But before we get into it, you've had quite an interesting career journey to this point, and so just keen to hear a little bit about how you got here. Claire, I know you've even published a cookbook on tropical foods. So if you could just
Sure.
talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, no worries. So initially I was a psychologist and I worked in a range of community-based fields, mostly in the west of Melbourne, um, including housing, homelessness, drug and alcohol, trauma, suicide prevention. And then I moved up to the Kimberley and I was practicing as a psychologist there, again with a pretty strong community development focus. And then I moved out of the field of psychology and into public health and health promotion, and I was working in Far North Queensland. So worked on some region-wide strategies there, and in some community development roles, and then moved into some lobbying and advocacy work. So I was in a role with the Torres Strait Island Regional Council, and assisting them in their work, advocating for the needs of the Torres Strait to the state and federal governments. And I've also been a CEO of a small organisation that provided both neighbourhood house and aged care, in-home aged care services. And from there, I moved into this role. So in the work with the Torres Strait Island Regional Council, one of the big issues that they dealt with was housing. So we were doing a lot of advocacy work, around that issue, particularly with the federal government. So that's a super brief version of my history. And I've worked at every level of government. So I've worked with local government, state and federal.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you've seen the housing issue on all fronts, from the health impacts, I imagine, or psychological impacts of individuals, right through to the kind of bigger policy sphere as well.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
how is it that kind of leads us, I guess, to where you're at now at Mount Alexander? Can you tell us a bit about how the position came to be and also a bit about what it entails as well,
Sure.
both from your own perspective and maybe a little bit from council's perspective as well?
Yep. So the position came out of some residual grant funding where the Shire had commissioned some work which was actually done by SGS on the land options for the delivery of social housing within the Shire. So it was looking at possible state and local government owned sites within the Shire. And having done that work, there was a small amount of money left over, and the CEO was able to successfully negotiate with the state to use that for a 9-month period to employ someone focused on implementation. Yeah.
Mm.
So the very clear brief when I came into the role was that that council wanted to see things happen. So they didn't want time going into developing housing strategies and policies. They wanted some runs on the board. And so in those first 9 months, another important factor is that I sit directly in the CEO directorate. So I report directly to the CEO. And that's an important thing to understand, because clearly the CEO directorate is a real bridging place between, the outer and the inner functionings of council. And it's a setting where there's a lot of opportunity for testing and for innovation. So, in the planning teams, for instance, the nature of that work is it's regulatory, it's focused on existing rules, and working with those and implementing those. So in that first 9 months with the grant funding, we really shaped up the role, and that formed the role description that has continued since that point. And the basic brief of the role is to facilitate responses to the unmet, affordable and appropriate housing needs of the community in our shire. Yeah, so it's quite holistic. It's not entirely focused on social housing at all. It's about the whole housing ecosystem, but it's very much about affordable housing. So it's in that spectrum from public housing, community housing, managed housing, through to the key worker market affordable end of the spectrum.
And just a quick question. So you said it was the 9-month position was from that grant funding. Is the position now kind of an ongoing role that will continue?
Correct.
Does it have a
It is.
horizon?
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing role. So I think from memory, it was extended by a year initially. So I was employed in the September, I think in around April or so, before we hit that end of funding in June. In April, it was extended for a year. And then I think it was the following year that it became an ongoing role.
Yeah, and what's some of the, I know council's recently established the trust in 2024. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that was a big part of your role. I don't know if you want to talk us kind of briefly through the trust
Sure.
or some other specific outcomes that you've been working on as well.
Yeah, yep. So looking at the whole system and what are the strengths within our shire, one thing that was clear was that there was a lot of community concern, and quite a lot of desire to be able to contribute something tangible to addressing the housing needs within the shire. And after looking at a range of different responses that different councils have made over time, we settled on investigating the opportunity of establishing an autonomous charitable trust within the community. So that got to the point in June of this year where the trust deed, which is the governing document, the foundation document of the trust that outlines its scope, its purpose, that was adopted by council in the June meeting. And then very shortly after that, in the September meeting of 2024, the advisory committee to the trust was appointed. So we've actually got an advisory committee appointed before we've got a trustee on board. And the reasoning for that was that the trust will be an autonomous organisation in the community, but because council has been facilitating the establishment of the trust, it's very easy for people to potentially see the trust as just another arm of council. So bringing on the advisory committee was part of helping that conversation with community and helping to get clear about the autonomy of the trust once the trustee is established. So that's one component of the role, but a lot of other work has been, the work that was done with that grant funding, looking at potential land sites within the shire, is obviously something I've picked up on. And as a council, we have very limited land holdings. And because of that, there's very limited underutilised or unutilised council-owned land. But out of that, we have made use of 4 sites that, that met those criteria, and have been through the council decision process of allocating them for affordable housing uses. So there are 2 sites right in the centre of Castlemaine, and they've been allocated in partnership with Haven HomeSafe to develop medium density apartments on those sites. And then there are smaller sites, one in Maldon, one in Newstead, and they've been allocated to Wintringham Housing to develop single person units for older members of the community. So that's council land. Another thing that has been a constant throughout my 3+ years in the role is working really closely with the CEO around advocating to the state around releasing some of their key land sites within the Shire. And that's a long process. But we do seem to be potentially getting a bit of traction on that, so that's good. And then I also had conversations with private landholders about the prospects of delivering affordable housing or a component of affordable housing on land that they hold. And I also work more broadly with the innovation space in housing delivery. So, I'm regularly researching and connecting with modular and prefabricated housing manufacturers, builders, developers, and also a lot of the newer, hybrid sort of housing delivery organisations that sit between the traditional community housing sector and the fully commercial building and development sector. So all of that is about the way that we're working, which is taking that complex systems perspective, that there's so many moving parts, and the system is is in a fail state. So you can pursue, if you pursue just one direction, the risks of that failing at any point along that road are really high. So it's important from our perspective, it's important to, have your fingers in a lot of pies, because you never know when things will just die in the water or just go quiet for a while. You might have something looking really viable that then just dies, and takes several years before it sort of pops up again as a viable option.
So it sounds like you spend a lot of your time on the phone and on the road, probably, and a bit less, of a traditional role of kind of desk-based work and
well, it is a mix, and it sort of comes it comes and goes depending on the cycle of where things are at. But yes, there's definitely a lot of time connecting with people, and obviously we've got phone, we've got Teams, and meeting people and going and checking out sites and opportunities. And then also just a lot of desk-based research and reading up on different approaches and different companies, what they're doing, etc. Yeah.
So it's actually quite interesting. You said council had taken a slightly different approach in that they were less focused on the development of the kind of strategy. So could you talk a little bit more about how, I know that the work that you're kind of currently doing and the housing trust is off the back of the identification of those council-owned parcels that might be leveraged for affordable housing. Where do you see the position in the future? And I guess just bringing into that a little bit about how you decide where it goes in the absence of a strategy. Just I think it's quite a pragmatic approach and flexible and adaptable.
Sure.
So I think it's of interest.
Yeah, it's not about not ever having a strategy at all, because in fact, uh, in 25, 26, we will be developing um, a housing strategy and probably some related policy. But it was about getting runs like I said earlier, it was about
Getting
getting
things
runs on the
moving.
board, and I think the danger, when you haven't had someone behind this sort of work within council and really embedded, or in the process of getting embedded into the whole system, understanding its intricacies and its risks and opportunities, then strategies can very easily be shelf based. They can be very generic, and they're not necessarily oriented towards the specific strengths and opportunities and risks of your setting, because you don't know them.
Mm.
Yeah, you haven't had the human resource engaged in sorting out what that might look like. So that's sort of where we're at there now. We have a good sense of what some of our strengths, opportunities, and risks are within the Shire. And so we're now going to develop a strategy that really then is able to anchor and cement some of the gains that we've been starting to make,
Mm.
um, and and ground that so that there's less chance, less risk of losing that work as we go forward. Yeah,
Mm.
so the strategic work and any related internal sort of policy work are about cementing what we've gained, and creating a regulatory, and a governance sort of structure around council
Mm.
that facilitates the opportunity for that to be a continuing focus
Yeah, I really
over
love that.
time.
Yeah, that you've developed the relationships and know how it all functions before kind of diving into putting words on the page. I think that's a
Yep.
really interesting approach. So, what would be your aspirations in the future, do you think? I know that this work is coming and perhaps it's a little premature, but yeah, what do you imagine as kind of the next 5 years of work in this space for
Well,
Mount Alexander?
okay, 5 years is going to go in a blink.
Yeah.
In
You can pick a
housing
time
terms,
horizon.
yeah, in housing terms, it's such a short period of time. But I mean, we're on the brink of establishing the trust, appointing a trustee. So that means that sometime, perhaps even within this year, that we might actually have the trust starting to function operationally as an autonomous organisation. Um, so, so once that step occurs, council then has a partner in the community that has a sole focus on responding to the affordable housing needs in the community. Um, some of the sort of uh, advocacy and lobbying work that has been going on through the CEO's office and through my role can then start to support the trust as the deliverer. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Um, so uh, we don't yet know where that will go, but clearly, any efforts that we make within council to identify uh, land and delivery opportunities are something that we can consider in the context of having a trust. Yeah,
Mm, mm,
because the trust, the purpose of the trust is about responding to those unmet, affordable, appropriate housing needs within the community, and the benefit for our shire is that any resource that goes into the trust, land or existing housing, is a resource in perpetuity for
mm,
for our shire. And that was one of the reasons for choosing a trust structure, because they have that very stable purpose and they have a very long time horizon. And so that gives that opportunity to really steadily build a corpus of permanent affordable rental housing within the Shire. And unlike the market, it's never going to go away. Um, so the trust is very likely to be a crucial part of what we do of the next 5 years. And bringing on those, those larger pieces of state land and bringing them into development.
Can I just ask a quick question about the trust? So council tipped in some money into the trust
Correct.
to kind of get it off the ground.
Yes.
And I think council's put out calls for further contributions. So is it that community members or people with an interest in housing in Mount Alexander can tip land
Anyone.
or assets in as well? Yeah.
Anyone. So the trust will be a registered charity and it will obtain deductible gift recipient status. So it will be a philanthropic organisation. It will be able to take donations that will attract tax deductible status. And so clearly our focus is on sharing that with our community within the Shire and with people more broadly who have meaningful connections to the Shire. But it also, like any philanthropic organisation, has that opportunity to build wider donor relationships. Yeah. So, I mean, we would certainly hope that because it's a fairly unique approach for a local government to be taking, of establishing a really fully autonomous trust organisation, we would hope that, there might be broader interest from people who are frustrated about how slow it is to address the housing needs within our communities, within our nation, and have interest in this particular model as a way of finding more innovative approaches that can utilise opportunities for government funding, but are in no way premised on needing that. Yeah. So the philanthropic status is a really crucial part of that picture, that the trust can actively seek to build a corpus that makes it, that gives it that ongoing viability without being reliant on government policy and government funding.
I think we could probably have there's local governments across the state either in the process of establishing a trust or thinking about it. We could probably have a whole conversation that's a separate one about the process of setting one up and the successes and pitfalls of Mount Alexander's experience. Just back to your role, I had another question about, we've talked a little bit about what you've been up to in the past years and what the program is likely to look like for the future. Can you talk a little bit about what you've found challenging from the role and how you've kind of got around that or overcome those challenges a little bit? What's been difficult in this process?
Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest ones is that, that the housing system's broken, and that we don't have some very fundamental changes in policy settings, particularly at the federal level, that could address some of the ongoing drivers of the system failing in the way that it's failing. So, that's challenging, but it's doesn't, there's clearly at this point no appetite from either side of the major parties at the federal level to address some of those taxation settings. So in the absence of that, that's why we're doing what we're doing, really. That we've tried to create some opportunities that can function outside of those constraints. And it's not just the policy settings. Anyone who's involved in housing knows how many different things are unpredictable or really challenging at this point, like the cost of materials, the cost and availability of skilled labour, even just, the costs of shifting to modular and prefabricated approaches. I think there's an enormous appetite out there amongst innovative builders and developers to to gear up into highly prefabricated and modularized approaches to housing, but you're talking tens of millions, to make that shift. So I think, there's a lot of structural challenges like that, and they have very, very real impacts. The other thing is that on a more, I guess it's slightly more micro level, is that although there's been, really significant amount of investment in Victoria in housing, the base model for assessing applications for those grants is fiscal. Yeah.
And when you're speaking about those grants, do you mean the HAF grants?
Talking about the state level, so
The
big
state
housing
level.
build, and the post big housing build funds that are still available now. So I'm talking about those Victorian social and affordable housing grant funding sources. And yeah, so their criteria are fundamentally fiscal. It's cost per dwelling. So there's two challenges to that, particularly for rural and regional councils. Well, there's a few, but the two big ones. One is that the cost of delivery is far higher, which has got to do with access to labour, access to materials, and also just the scale of building. When you're building smaller, you're not getting, those volume discounts and efficiencies. And so that means that we're inherently disadvantaged being in a rural setting. And the other restriction to having a highly fiscal approach is that it's not a economic efficiency, it's not an economic benefit approach. Because anyone who lives in smaller settings, and particularly anyone who's lives in or has experienced, even smaller towns, Castlemaine's, a modest sized town. But if you look even at some of the smaller towns within our shire, if you gain or lose one or two houses, particularly if they're houses that are available for key services like teachers and doctors and AMBOs and police, etc., that can make a really enormous impact on a place. And, an additional 10 or 20 houses in somewhere like Castlemaine can be incredibly significant. But that sort of benefit is not measured within the granting system. So that's also a really significant barrier in terms of how forms of funding, are evaluated.
Great. I think that we're coming up on time. So before we wrap up, I just wanted you to share a little bit about what advice you might give other local governments kind of working in this space or looking to create a position similar to yours, particularly rural and regional councils.
Yep, sure. I think there's a few things. One is go with your strengths. Yeah. And every place has strengths. And they're not necessarily looking you straight in the eye. Yeah. Because it's not just about whether you've got builders and labour available within the region. It's not only those really obvious things. It's also about the the values base, within your shire, because housing is such a fundamental thing to the vitality of communities, that there are absolutely ways of identifying concerns and values which will be pretty universal across your whole community. Yeah. And so building that community consensus, I think is possible in virtually all settings. You've just got to find the angle that works for your setting. Yeah.
Is that about messaging, Claire? Like, how do you do that? How do you identify, I know
it's about
houses
knowing
go.
your community. Yeah. Because there's no point sort of getting slick messaging out if it's not in alignment with if it's not going to resonate with people. Yeah. So you've got to know your community. That's the crucial thing. And I mean, we're really fortunate in our shire in that this role came on board once there was alignment across the community level, the elected councillors, and the executive of our council. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that there's not disagreement. It doesn't mean, and particularly at the community level, it doesn't mean that there are not people who will complain when there's the prospect of social or affordable housing being built in their neighbourhood, because we absolutely still have that issue like many other places. But it's about building and connecting to enough of a consensus, within the community. And that's a very, very powerful thing. That's an enormous part of what has enabled us to move what in housing terms is quite quickly through opportunities in the last few years. What has facilitated that in our community is that there was already a network within the community that had formed around concern for the lack of affordable housing, and that's called My Home Network, and it's coordinated out of Delkire Health, which is the state health service within our shire. And so that is a network, a community-based network that is advocating for affordable housing needs. Now, in other rural settings, you may not bring that together, but you may well have other community organisations that already exist that are happy to, or are already passionate about, or are happy to be a community anchored advocate for the need for affordable housing. Could be the CWA, it could be a local Rotary or Lions or Apex Club, could be a parents committee of the school. It's just about having a community partner group who can be working alongside you and helping to act as a networked grassroots conversation network that helps to reduce the risk of polarising positioning happening in the community around delivering affordable housing.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. If there's something that you didn't get to say or any final messages?
No, I think that's it. We've got quite a bit of information about what we've done on our website, on the Mount Alexander Shire website.
And you have a little newsletter I shouldn't call it a little newsletter. You have a newsletter that goes out regularly as well.
Yeah,
that keeps
and
people informed.
Yes, so we've got the core council website, and then we've got our consultation platform, the SHAPE platform, and both of those have information about what's happening in the affordable housing space. And then if people want to look through council agendas, they can find some of the papers that have been presented over the last few years as well.
Thanks so much, Claire. We'll leave you there. So we've been speaking with Clare Richards, Housing Solutions Broker at Mount Alexander Shire Council. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thanks,
Thanks,
Emily.
Claire.